Hi everyone, and welcome to a new video on this channel, this time about blue-green deployments with a tool called Argo Rollouts. Before we start showing you some practical example, let's take a look at the bigger picture here. So why would you want to use something like Argo Rollouts to do a blue-green deployment? Well, normally you do deployments in Kubernetes with a deployment manifest, or you use the type or the kind deployment. And yeah, that deployment has a couple of update strategies, but they're quite limited. You can do a rolling update and you can do a recreate, where rolling update is most often used because rolling update doesn't give you any downtime, but it has a couple of things you need to think about. First of all, it works best when they are stateless services, and also when they are backward compatible, because at a certain point in time you will have two versions of your applications running at the same time. And then of course backward compatibility at the API level, for instance, is quite important. If these types of strategies are not enough for you, there are many other ones you can use as well. For example, blue-green and canary. But Kubernetes by default does not provide this. Now, you could build this on top of the deployment type, but that's quite cumbersome and not very GitOps friendly. I would like to basically declare that I want to do a blue-green deployment, and that's it. So Argo rollouts can then be used to replace deployments. Instead of a deployment, you'll create a manifest of type rollout. That's a custom resource. And then you can define additional strategies such as blue-green and canary, or turn on things like progressive delivery. Now we'll start easy and we'll check out the blue-green strategy and see how that works. Now, from a theoretical point of view, when you want to deploy an application, you typically would create a deployment, and in the deployment spec you would say what pods you want to run, how many you want to run, etc. You put a service in front of that, and potentially also an ingress object. So you would actually start from a deployment specification. Now you can just follow the same approach, but instead you'll create a manifest of kind rollout. That would also create a replica set, create your pods, and there should be what we call an active service in front of it. Yeah. And you'll see why there's an active service in front of it in a moment. So this is very similar when you create a rollout with Argo. It's very similar to how you create a deployment. You get this kind of resources. Now that changes when, for example, you modify the container image in the template spec of your rollout. Because in that case, with the blue-green strategy, a new replica set will be rolled out. You will get new versions of your pods, and I should have actually switched the color here. Apologies for that, but doesn't matter, you get the point. And what will happen in this case is a preview service will be connected to it. Now you have to create that preview service in advance, but Argo will then actually make sure that the preview service, that the endpoints of that preview service are the new pods. And then you can use that preview service to manually or automatically verify if your service is working properly. Now there are multiple ways in how you can define how the new rollout should become active. You can do this automatically. So when it's fully rolled out, switch over right away to the new service. Or you could actually halt it. You could say, no, I don't want to do an automatic progression. I want somebody to promote this new service to become the green one, so to speak, right? After promotion, this is what happens. So first, the new replica set pods will become active because the active service is modified and will point to those new pods, which also means the ingress will now be able or give you access to those new pods. And when that is working properly, or when that is done, the existing replica set will be scaled to 0. Yeah. Now rollout uses revisions for that, revision 1, revision 2, and so on. But basically, this is how it works. Now it's great to see it, hopefully in theory, but let's see how it works in practice. So first of all, you have to install Argo rollouts. Now that's very easy. I won't discuss it too much. here you see it's just 2 lines. Kubectl create a namespace and then apply a manifest to that namespace. When you're using Kubernetes under version 1.16, I think, you have to put the dash dash validate is false there. Now these things you can also find, maybe let's close this here. These things you can also find on the Argo Rollouts documentation page. And there you see in the getting started the exact same commands that you can do. Now what you're doing here is a cluster-wide deployment. There's also a way to do namespace bound deployments, but we just use the cluster-wide deployment here. Now one of the neat features of Argo Rollouts is that the rollout manifest is not that different from a deployment manifest. So I have an existing manifest here that actually deploys multiple things. It deploys a Redis container. It then deploys an application that I wrote myself, a very simple socket.io server. And this is, as you can see, a regular deployment. Now I would want to use a rollout for this. Very simple. I'm going to just base my work on this existing manifest. So I'm going to copy it and paste it into a new folder and open it there. So how do I actually modify this deployment? Well, first of all, Argo, the API version for rollout, should be set properly. That is argo project.io/v1 alpha1. And instead of a deployment, we'll define a rollout here. This is from an earlier example which was using Flux for GitOps. I'm going to remove that. I'm going to deploy version 1.0.0 and later deploy upgrade to 1.0.2, but this one is 1.0.0. And that's it. So I actually modify my deployment into a rollout. It's not much use, of course, if I don't specify what my strategy will be. So for strategy, I want to use the blue-green strategy. And I want to, or you have to provide the active service. Yeah, that's for your, let's say, the blue service, the green service, the preview service, which will be for the blue one. And then remember I said you can automatically progress to the new service once deployed, or you can halt and wait for somebody to promote. Yeah, that's indeed with this auto promotion enabled is false. Now, what to use for the service? Well, I already had a service defined for my application, and this service is then used by an ingress to make the service available to the outside world. I'm going to modify the name of this service. So I'm going to make it or call it active, and I'm going to refer to this as the active service. Quite simple. I'm going to then also need a preview service. So I'm just going to copy the service here. I'm going to call this real-time app preview, and I will set it as real-time app preview here. Yeah, that's done. Now I should not forget my ingress that makes this service available to the outside world, which is doing also let's encrypt and doing cookie persistence and so on. Should point, of course, to the active service, right? So when I save this, it's time for me to actually deploy this. So let's go to the rollouts folder and then to the real-time folder and do a kubectl apply -f, and yeah, we can do dot here, it's not a problem. Now let me first check if I'm in the default namespace. So I'm checking out here with the Kubernetes extension of Visual Studio Code because I want to deploy in the default namespace just for demo. And normally I think that one should be the active one. So the namespace default is indeed the active one. You see the asterisk there, right? So when we run this, this should normally deploy the application. But as you can see, instead of a deployment, there is actually a rollout being configured. Yeah, good. Now, what has happened is what you have seen in the first slide. The rollout deployed a replica set. There are 2 pods running. The active service is pointing to the pods, and my ingress is pointing to my active service. We can verify this with a tool such as KubeView that I also installed. And you can see KubeView here. If I just go to... Oh, yes. One moment. Very important. We should delete what's in there first and then apply, because otherwise I don't get my new service. Don't worry too much about that. I'm going to KubeView, and there you see my real-time service. Now let it become stable for a moment, so I'm going to refresh it a few times, and there you have it. So what we actually had an existing deployment going on there. I leave this in the video. That's always good to see errors coming up. So now we have this rollout, this 1 replica set with my 2 pods. And that's exactly what KubeView is showing me. The replica set, my 2 pods, and my active service is pointing to these pods, 15 and 44. The preview service is also pointing to 15 and 44 because it's the only thing I have. I have my ingress and I have my certificate already bound to it. This also means that I could go to real.bake.info. I'm going to refresh it because version 1.0.0 looks a little bit differently than this version here. So let's see if that works. Could be that it's not stable enough yet for the things to be all deployed, but we'll see that in a moment. Yeah, indeed, he's not there yet. Let me check that. So let me check in the workloads, in the pods, and there we see my real-time app is deployed. The real-time app is using 1.0.0, so that's fine. It could be that my certificate is maybe not yet in place. So let's go to the certificates, certificate for real.bake.info. And what do we get there? It's up to date and has not expired, so that should actually be good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try this again. Real.bake.info. Could be the IP address. So let's take a look. It's 51 and so on. Let's open up the command prompt. Ping real.bake.info. Yeah, that's not the correct one, as you can see. So let's do ipconfig flush DNS. Might not exactly work, but let's just try it anyway. No, not yet. So just let it become stable. In a moment that should work, that's fine. So in a moment my application will become available, but it has to still do some work to get all the names and IPs and everything correct. Fine, we have our deployment or our rollout being done. Now we want to check or verify, yeah, what's going on here. So there is a plugin for Kubectl, which is the Argo Rollouts plugin, which I've installed here in the Ubuntu shell on Windows, because it's not available for Windows. If I'm using this command here, kargo rollouts get rollout real-time app, you should see what he has done so far. So we see that indeed the active application is 1.0.0. You can see that here. We're using a blue-green strategy. It's healthy. And we have our first replica set. That's the one, that's revision 1. And my pods are running. So that's fine. That means that we actually have something that is resembling this here. Great. Now let's modify the image. So my developer is saying, I have a new version for you. We're going to modify manually the image to version 1.0.2. So we save this and we apply this, which means we are modifying our rollout here. A couple of things will happen now. So if I'm going to my KubeView application, you see that now suddenly we have 2 replica sets. We have, of course, two sets of pods because we have two replica sets. Now, what you'll see is that this is my current green application, 1.0.0. The pod IP is 44 and 15. Well, the active service is pointing to 15 and 44. Now, this is my blue service, so to speak. Yeah. So what do we have here? This one is using 1.0.2. Pod IP is 12 and 47. My preview service is pointing to 12 and 47. So that's great, right? The ingress is still pointing to my active service. Right. So that's good. This now means that I can use the preview service to verify if my application was correctly deployed. Now in this case, there's a front end involved, so I can actually look at the front end and maybe check out that the application still works. How do we do that? Well, that's of course simple. We go to our Kubernetes plugin here. We go to the network. We'll find our services and we can easily go to the preview service, port forward, and we do 8080 to port 80, right? 8080 is the local port and 80 is the remote port. So if I'm checking this out with localhost 8080, what I'm seeing is application with this purple background. Yeah, that's indeed version 1.0.2 is using this really ugly color. Now let's see if my production already stabilized. I'm not sure about this, but let's check it out. Real.bake.info. Yes, there it is. And you can see version 1.0.0 has this light blue background. A little bit easier on the eyes, but let's suppose we want to progress to the purple background. How do we actually do that? So now we come to the following one here. We want to make sure that we go from here to this. So we have now our application with the purple background running this way, but it's not active. We want to make it active by doing a promotion. How do we do that promotion? Well, that can be done quite simply with the promote command. So here you see it, Argo Rollouts promote real-time app. When I do this, promotion happens. When I check the rollout, now you see that there are two images involved. 1.0.2 becomes the active image. That's this one. This one is now active. That's my revision 2. My second replica set becomes the active one. But we're still progressing. Progressing means there's still work being done. For example, what should happen is that revision 1 should get scaled down to 0 pods, right? Should be scaled to 0. Let's refresh this and see if that's really happening. And indeed, you can see it. Now we have our revision 2 active. It's the green one. Revision 1, the old one, has been scaled down. Yeah, no pods running there. And we see that now we are using 1.0.2 and the status is healthy. Now, we do have the following. That is that if we look at KubeView, for instance, no, that's the wrong one. Look at KubeView, you now see we have only this one replica set active with the 2 pods, but both the active and the preview service will point to the same one because there's only one version now running within the system. So at the preview level, that still is active. I can still refresh this. This still works. That's the purple background. Now, if everything went well, my production application should now have been switched to use the ugly background as well. Yeah, and indeed, by refreshing it, we can verify the ugliness, and we have successfully progressed or shifted to the new version of the application 1.0.2, which is using this background. So now we basically have ended up at this slide here. Yeah. So I hope that made it clear for you how a blue-green deployment works with something like Argo Rollouts. I would say give it a try. Don't try to build your own blue-green solution. Give it a try. Maybe respond back in the comments to say how you liked it. And maybe next time we'll take a look at how a canary deployment works. We'll see. Till next time, bye bye.